Hello and welcome to this session focused on exploring teaching and learning strategies to engage digital T-level delivery. This session will provide you with a range of strategies and insights to help equip your students with the relevant skills required in the digital industry and also to support in preparing them for upcoming ESP or OS assignments. So the aims of this session are to develop targeted teaching strategies to support with preparing digital T-level students for ESP and OS assessments. So to do this, we'll identify some key areas for development arising from digital T-level Chief Examiner reports, and we'll use this information to explore a range of teaching and learning strategies across key themes, including reflection, report writing and data analysis, tailored to the needs of T-level digital students. So first of all, we'll start by looking at an overview of themes arising from Chief Examiner's reports across both digital support and digital business services T-levels. So we'll start by looking at the ESP Chief Examiner feedback. So for both the digital support and digital business services, the following areas were identified in terms of where student skills need further development. So data handling and number. When working on a project, it's essential to ensure that the data chosen is relevant, presented in an organised and logical way, and effectively used to inform the project's direction. And strengthening numeracy and budgeting skills in real-world context is a key part of project planning and can enhance the overall quality of work. In terms of report writing, it was identified that tasks should link back to the project brief, in terms of both context and aims, ensuring that the work remains focused and purposeful. Additionally, it's important to consider the impact of issues on the project, evaluating how these factors may influence outcomes. Structured training on how to approach tasks can provide valuable guidance and improve performance. Then in terms of presentation of student work, students should be informed around how to avoid plagiarism and ensure that their work is proofread carefully. Presentation materials should directly address the issues faced in the project and relate to the data provided. And it would be good practice to ensure that each slide in the presentation clearly links back to the project aims to help maintain focus on the task. Now looking at communication, it was identified that further practice in communicating with different audiences is crucial for success. So for example, during presentations, students should aim to engage the audience through interactive presentations and the use of visual data, for example, movement on slides or use of image formatting tools to make sure their visual data is presented in a more unique way. And then finally, looking at evaluation and reflection. So when conducting evaluations, students should focus on linking them again back to the project aims rather than just summarising actions taken. They should use evaluative rather than descriptive language in post-project reviews and reflect on performance, clearly identifying areas for development and how to improve their skills for success in future projects. And now we move on to looking at some of the key areas for development arising from the Chief Examiner reports for the Occupational Specialist assessments. So again, starting with data handling and number, it was identified that improvement is required in the selection, blending and impactful reporting of data to enhance overall project quality. In terms of report writing, a lack of critical thinking and insufficient use of research evidence impacted marks, highlighting the need for deeper analysis and evidence-based approaches. And reports should be more detailed, clear and strategically valuable, with a stronger focus on the given scenario rather than just technical details. And this will really help students better communicate their findings, which is crucial for their future success in the data analytics industry. Then moving on to the presentation of work. The quality of work suffered in some cases due to limited or incomplete evidence. To address this, students are encouraged to add annotations to screenshots, audio or video files to strengthen their submissions. And in cases marks were lost for missing screenshots or failing to evaluate their sources, highlighting areas where greater attention is needed. Now moving on to study skills. Selective answering by some students suggests gaps in knowledge that require attention. Time management skills also needed improvement, as excessive time spent on shorter tasks negatively impacted the performance on other, more complex tasks. And then finally, looking at evaluation and reflection. Comments often fail to connect effectively to the scenario, and there is room for improvement in critical evaluation and the use of data visualization techniques. Addressing these issues will result in more comprehensive and impactful submissions. So, in response to the findings from the Chief Examiner reports, we'll now have a look at some teaching and learning strategies that could be helpful in enhancing your students' outcomes, particularly in terms of the ESP and OS preparation. So we'll start by looking at the maths skills required in the digital T-level assignments, with the main focus being on data handling and financial budgeting, as these are skills required across various ESP and OS assessments, in particular the digital business services, and are often commented on in Chief Examiner reports as being areas that would benefit from further development. So first of all, we'll start to looking at where data handling skills could be improved and how this can be encouraged within your teaching. So bear in mind that in terms of mathematical content at this level, your students should be familiar with most of the data handling methods from their previous GCSE math studies. However, they will likely be unfamiliar with dealing with larger data sets and applying these strategies to project-based real-world scenarios. So first we'll have a look at sampling techniques. So students do need to understand how to select and sample from populations in ways that avoid bias and ensure representativeness. And this could include methods such as random sampling or stratified sampling. So you could use data sets for students to analyse the limitations, either using data from past or sample exam papers, or more widely through the media. For example, looking at marketing and advertising campaigns in terms of how they persuade customers to buy products. Students could consider questions such as, are these samples representative of a wider population, and do they show bias or limitations? Next, thinking about the use of surveys. So students need to understand how surveys can be used in gathering data, but also the implications for bias, accuracy and reliability. So again, students could analyse a range of real-world survey data to consider their effectiveness. For example, who is the survey aimed at? How are the questions structured? Do the response options allow for a full range of views? And are the questions free from bias? And therefore, are the surveys representative or limited to within the sample population? Data representation is important to consider. So, for example, how data is represented through graphs, bar charts, pie charts, box plots, etc., and how statistical tools could be used to summarise the data. So students need to be given opportunities to become competent with software such as Microsoft Excel to create a range of graphs and charts. Opportunities should also be given to practice in presenting multiple data on a graph, for example, dual data bar graphs or multiple representation line graphs, to facilitate comparison between data sets. When extracting data, students should be given opportunities to look at large data sets and identify and pull out themes for analysis. They need to develop skills in picking out the relevant data from larger sets to find potential solutions to a specific industry-related issue. For example, where best to place a shop based on regional and national sales data, surveys and social or economic data. Students should also be made aware of how to cleanse data. So, for example, techniques for handling outliers or missing data and how this could affect their analysis. When using averages and range, These types of calculations can be used to identify trends in data, but again, students should be aware of the potential bias, limitations, or misleading results arising from these methods. So again, opportunities to use data sets and discuss which average or range would be most appropriate and useful would be good for students to practice. And consider things like, how do outliers affect the mean or the range, and when would other averages, for example the median or the mode, be more appropriate. And then finally, looking at analysis and conclusions. So students should learn to be critical in their evaluations and interpretation of the data, rather than simply describing their findings. So when drawing conclusions and making predictions, again, they need to be aware of potential limitations of their methods and outcomes. They should also consider the impact of their findings and make suggestions and recommendations for improvement as a result. You could use problem-solving tasks in class that involve working with data sets, interpreting results, and applying statistical and mathematical techniques to develop these skills with students. And make sure to incorporate project-based scenarios where students may need to develop solutions to real-world problems that involve significant data handling and analysis. In the Digital Support Services ESP assessment, students are typically required to demonstrate their understanding of budgeting within the context of planning and delivering a digital project. While the exact requirements may vary depending on the task, students generally need to provide the following. So, a breakdown of costs. They need to identify specific costs such as hardware, software, licensing fees and any other resources, and also consider whether these are one-off or ongoing costs. They need to justify why each cost is necessary and how it contributes to the project objectives. And accuracy, they need to make sure that their budget calculations are correct and realistic. It's worth noting here that the math skills involved in creating a budget should be within your students' capabilities. However, it's really important that they focus on presenting their work clearly and logically to account for all costs involved. To ensure accuracy in their calculations, please get students to practice using a calculator. Using a phone in class in place of a calculator can potentially cause problems in exam situations when students are unfamiliar with the functions on a scientific calculator and phones aren't available. So to develop budgeting skills, you could encourage students to use past or sample real-world scenarios to investigate. So allocate specific time for each part of the task so that students become familiar with the constraints of assessment. You could also provide a total budget limit to add an extra element for students to consider. Help students to develop their internet browsing skills by using comparison sites to investigate best deals. Get students to consider alternative solutions, for example, physical versus cloud-based options. And then in terms of presenting a budget, students need to learn how to present their information clearly using a table or a spreadsheet format. You can see some examples of this in the NCFE student exemplar materials, so I would encourage you to have a look at these. It would be useful to consider headings for each category, for example, item, quantity, cost per unit, etc. And use subtotals for different areas of spending in order to ensure accuracy with the overall totals. You could get students to create pie charts or bar graphs of their budgets to help visualise how the total budget is allocated across categories. And students must show an understanding of financial constraints by ensuring the total budget does not exceed a given limit if specified, identifying areas where costs could be reduced without compromising the project's quality or outcomes. Then in terms of discussion and evaluation, you could get students to present their budgets to the class, explaining their choices for resource allocation and estimated costs. And peers could then give feedback on potential improvements or more cost-effective solutions. And students could be encouraged to reflect on how they ensured the budget was managed effectively during planning and any risks or challenges they anticipated regarding the budget and how these were mitigated. And always encourage students to justify their decisions. For example, why did they select a particular software tool? Get them to critically think about their decisions and what they could improve in future projects. So now we'll move on to report writing. Developing report writing skills is possibly one of the most crucial aspects of both ESP and OS assignments. Teaching students how to write well-detailed reports involves developing their technical, analytical and organisational writing skills. These assessments often require structured, concise and professional communication that demonstrates technical understanding and problem-solving abilities. So here's a step-by-step guide to help students break down the structure of a report. So the introduction should include an overview of the task or problem along with the objectives. Encourage students to make a brief plan of their report before they start writing, so their approach will be logical and structured, adhering to the time constraints for the assessment and containing all relevant and necessary information. Next, the main body of the report is where the students should present their data and research or technical processes. Encourage students to practice linking each step of their work back to the project brief and supporting each step with evidence as appropriate, for example screenshots or supporting data such as visuals and graphs and charts. Their discussion should also explain the implication of their findings and relate them back to the task requirements. The conclusion should summarise key points and make recommendations. It should offer clear, actionable suggestions based on the analysis, and students need to be confident in evaluating rather than describing their outcomes. It's okay to admit they would have done something differently or made a mistake and had to rethink their ideas. At this point, they should also consider implications for future projects, particularly in terms of their own training and development needs. And then finally, the appendices would include any supplementary material, if appropriate, such as diagrams or tables, network plans or inventory logs. So students should consider what evidence could enhance or support their work. So the next slide will look in more depth at how you can help your students develop these skills to improve their report writing. So how can we help students develop their report writing skills? Well, firstly, sample reports can be a really useful tool to help students understand the purpose and importance of reports. They can analyse samples to understand how to best communicate findings, propose solutions, or document technical processes in a professional setting. You can model good practices by showing examples of high-quality reports and comparing them to weaker examples, and we'll discuss this later in relation to use of the student exemplar materials. And also practice writing for specific real-world scenarios. Make tasks relevant to students by using scenarios they might encounter in the workplace. And you could include prompts for students to explain why they have chosen specific solutions, not just what they are, and include realistic challenges such as limited budgets or remote working needs. Next, it's important that students understand how to write, so teaching students to write clearly and professionally is important. For example, using bullet points, headings and subheadings for readability. Avoid overly casual language, maintain a professional tone and include diagrams, tables or screenshots to clarify technical details. Encourage students to cite their sources, such as when using technical standards or legal requirements. Demonstrate how to integrate case studies, statistics or real-world examples into their reports. And make sure to align the writing to the assessment criteria. So help students understand how their reports will be assessed by breaking down the mark scheme into specific skills. And you could map sections of the report to these criteria to ensure all points are covered. Breaking down tasks is useful, so for example providing templates to standardise report writing with preset headings and formatting. Emphasise the importance of time management and planning, and you could use timed exercises to support with this. And encourage accuracy when discussing technical concepts, So, for example, practice summarising tasks using short paragraphs or bullet points with a focus on correct terminology and concise information. And also highlight the importance of avoiding vague or generic statements and communicating effectively with the audience. And reinforce key skills through mini tasks. So, for example, break the report writing down into smaller activities, such as writing a single section, or practice creating diagrams or tables to support findings for a small section. And then finally, developing analysis and evaluation skills. So, help students how to analyse and interpret information. You could ask them to practice highlighting and identifying key issues in a task, and teach them to evaluate multiple solutions and then justify their recommendations. You could use tools like a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, to organise analysis. And then in terms of reflection, teach students how to review and improve their own work. So, for example, you could provide checklists for self-assessment, considering elements such as: have all the criteria been addressed? Is the language clear and professional? Are the technical details accurate? And encourage students to reread their reports from the perspective of the examiner. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at how to use mock exams effectively. So, using mock exams effectively requires a strategic approach to ensure students gain the maximum benefit from the experience. Here's a step-by-step guide on how to make the most of your mock exams. So firstly, align mock exams with learning objectives and focus on key topic areas and relevant skills that students are expected to master. Create a realistic testing environment to prepare students for the conditions they'll experience in the actual exam. So, for example, set time limits identical to the actual exam, use a quiet room with the resources they would be allowed in the exam, and provide clear instructions and task breakdowns so students understand what's expected of them to perform well. Ensure students treat the exam seriously, as mocks are most effective when students approach them with the same effort and mindset as the real exam. Emphasise the importance of the mocks for identifying strengths and weaknesses, and remind them that it's a safe space to make mistakes and learn. Use the mock exams to identify gaps in understanding and areas for improvement. Analyse the results to identify patterns, such as commonly misunderstood questions or poorly applied concepts, and then focus your subsequent teaching or revision sessions on these weak areas. And provide detailed feedback to help students understand what they did well and where they need improvement. Mock exams can be a powerful tool when used strategically, helping students practice, identify areas of growth, and building confidence for the real exam. On the next slide, we'll look at some ideas of how you might be able to achieve this. Rubrics with marks awarded can significantly help students improve by providing a clear, structured framework for understanding expectations and evaluating performance. So a rubric outlines the criteria for success and the standards required to achieve different levels of performance, broken down into clear, measurable components so students know exactly what is expected of them. By detailing marks for each criteria, a rubric shows where students performed well and where they lost points, so they can easily identify areas of strength and for development. When students can see how they earned their marks, it validates their effort and encourages further progress. And for teachers, rubrics can help streamline the marking process by predefining criteria and associated marks. And this should help provide more timely feedback to students and ensure consistency of marking. Don't waste the opportunities a mock assessment can provide. Encourage students to self-assess and make corrections to their work. It could be useful here to use a different colour pen, so for easy identification of changes or annotations to the original assessment. Additionally, following a mock assessment, using shadow questions can be useful for helping students improve their skills and understanding. So you could create shadow questions yourself or use AI to replicate the mock assessment by altering the context and questions so that students do not repeat the same assessment. And using shadow questions can help students demonstrate progress in their learning following feedback and additional teaching and revision around their areas for development. Shadow questions are not meant as a repeated mock assessment, but should be broken down into smaller chunks individualised to student-specific areas development. And shadow assessments are low stakes, meaning they focus on learning rather than grades, and students can target their own specific areas, making the learning more effective and personalised. I briefly mentioned earlier about using pass and distinction level exemplar materials to help students understand the expectations for their assessments and improve their performance. So here's a few suggestions as to how you could do this in your teaching. So firstly, understanding the marking criteria. So provide students with a clear understanding of what distinguishes a pass from a distinction. This could be tied to the mark scheme or rubrics used for the assessment. Have students apply the marking criteria to an exemplar before reviewing their own or peers' work. And use the exemplars to break down the requirements for key sections of the assessment. Compare and analyse exemplars. So show students both pass and distinction level work for the same task. Get them to highlight key differences such as depth of analysis, quality of technical language, use of evidence, or level of detail. And model good practice. So you can show how distinction level work is often better organised, more clearly presented, and uses precise terminology. And use this to teach skills such as structuring reports, using headers effectively, and presenting data visually, for example, diagrams and charts. Teach reflection. So ask students to compare their own work against the exemplars, considering questions such as, what features of this distinction level work could I incorporate into my own? And encourage students to focus on areas like problem solving, depth of research, and clarity in presenting solutions. Highlight specific techniques. So show students how distinction level work applies to real world techniques or demonstrates innovative thinking. And look at how distinction level exemplars back up claims with evidence, for example, citations, diagrams, or external sources. You could create scaffolding activities. So, for example, provide a pass level exemplar and ask students to rewrite it or enhance it to reach distinction level quality. And guide students to develop their own checklist based on the exemplar, listing features of distinction level work, for example, depth of explanation or use of diagrams. And finally, build confidence and motivation. So exposing students to high quality work can inspire them to achieve distinction level performance, whilst also pass level exemplars can reassure students that they are capable of meeting basic expectations before aiming higher. Now we'll have a look at presenting evidence. So to help students present their evidence more effectively, it's important to focus on strategies that enhance clarity and organisation. The goal is not just to complete an assessment, but to communicate findings, insights and solutions in a way that meets industry standards. So the following teaching strategies may help you guide students in improving their presentational skills. So firstly, scaffold evidence collection and documentation. So help break down the process of collecting and documenting evidence into manageable stages, ensuring that students understand what constitutes valid evidence for each part of the assessment. Provide clear templates to guide students in documenting their work and teach them how to explicitly justify the relevance of their evidence to the assignment brief or assessment outcome. Focus on visual and oral presentation skills. So you can improve students' ability to present evidence visually and orally in a clear and professional manner. For example, teach them how to create clear, concise visuals such as charts, graphs and tables to support their evidence. And emphasise the importance of using visuals that are easy to interpret and that directly support the key points in a presentation. You could introduce students to tools like PowerPoint, Canva or Prezi to design professional-looking presentations that are visually appealing and easy to follow, and hold practice sessions where students can present their work in front of peers or teachers, focusing on clarity of speech, confidence and engagement with the audience. And teach students how to avoid overloading the slides with text and focus on key points with bullets and short explanations. Develop effective storytelling and narrative skills by teaching students how to structure their presentations as a coherent narrative, where they guide the audience through their thought process and evidence step by step. For example, using the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. And help students use this model to structure both their written evidence and oral presentations, and encourage them to tell a story with their data or technical solutions. For example, rather than simply presenting a data set, students could explain what the data tells us about a problem and how their solution addresses it. Use formative assessment effectively. So you could provide mini assessments or progress reports throughout the course to give students feedback on how their evidence presentation is evolving. These could include drafts of reports or practice presentations. Provide students with clear rubrics that outline exactly what is expected for each aspect of their evidence presentation, and encourage them to self-check their work against these rubrics. Promote time management and organisation. So encourage students to manage their time effectively throughout the assessment process so they can allocate enough time for evidence gathering, documentation and presentation preparation. Provide opportunities to practice breaking down a project into smaller tasks, for example, research, data collection, analysis, draft writing and presentation, and guide them on how to allocate time for each stage. And finally, teach critical reflection and self-evaluation. So encourage students to not only present their work, but also critically reflect on their own processes, decisions and outcomes. For example, they could keep a reflection log or journal throughout the assessment where they critically evaluate each step of the process. For example, what went well, what challenges they encountered and how they resolved issues. Or you could provide self-assessment rubrics, as previously discussed, aligning with the assessment criteria to allow students to evaluate their own evidence and identify areas for improvement. So overall, by developing presentation skills, students can better demonstrate their technical expertise, analytical thinking and professional communication abilities in their final assessments. To help T-level students improve their communication skills, particularly engaging different audiences, both technical and non-technical, and using interactive presentations and visual data, here are some suggested teaching activities. So tailor the communication to different audiences. So provide students, for example, with 2 different profiles, one for a technical audience, such as a software developer or an IT professional, and one for a non-technical audience, such as a business executive or client with little technical knowledge. Students could prepare the same piece of work, so something like explaining a software solution or project, and modify it for both audiences. They should simplify technical jargon for the non-technical audience while adding more detailed technical explanations and industry-specific terms for the technical audience. You could also have students present their work to the class in both styles, firstly as if addressing a technical audience and then as if addressing a non-technical one. Classmates could provide feedback on how well the message was adapted to each audience. Role-playing with different stakeholders. So students could be assigned various stakeholder roles. So, for example, a technical manager, a non-technical business owner, a user or a developer. And each student will present their project or solution from their perspective of the assigned role, considering how each stakeholder would respond or need to be convinced. After presenting, students will respond to hypothetical questions from other students acting as different stakeholders, and they could adapt their responses to suit the technical understanding of the audience they're addressing. The Explain Like I'm 5 exercise could be helpful to encourage students to explain complex technical topics in a way that they're explaining it to a child or someone with no technical background. So in small groups, students could take turns explaining their topic in very simple terms. They should focus on using analogies, simple language, and avoiding technical jargon. Interactive presentations. So teach students how to create presentations that engage the audience using interactive elements that allow for things like interactive polls, quizzes, clickable links, or embedded content. Students could design a short presentation, just 5 or 10 minutes, that includes at least one interactive element. The content should be a relevant, real-world project and aim to engage both technical and non-technical audiences. And students could present their interactive presentations to a peer group and gather feedback on how well the interactive elements kept the audience engaged and contributed to the understanding of the topic. And then use data visualization for different audiences. So you could discuss how different visual formats, for example charts or graphs or infographics, could be used to communicate data and how best to select the appropriate format for a given audience. Explain that non-technical audiences may prefer simple visualizations with clear labels, while technical audiences may benefit from more detailed charts. Students could work with a data set and create 2 versions of a visual representation. One for a technical audience, for example using detailed graphs or statistical measures, and one for a non-technical audience, for example using an infographic or a simplified bar chart. And then students could present both versions of their visual data to a group, explaining the rationale behind the design choices for each audience. Peers could feedback on the clarity and relevance of the visuals. Many students have not really developed effective study or revision strategies, so this is worth exploring in class and using time to develop a range of methods so that by the time students are preparing for summative assessment, they have tools specific to their own learning needs to effectively prepare. So creating flashcards can be useful for students to highlight key points and summarise them in their own words. Start developing flashcards in class for testing knowledge, especially for definitions and key terms. Teach students to question what they read. For example, why is this important, or how does this connect to other topics? And not be afraid to be critical and use evidence-based arguments to question what they read. Help students organise their time effectively to avoid last-minute cramming. For example, teach them to use tools like online calendars or apps. And you could introduce techniques such as the Pomodoro technique, which is 25 minutes of focused study, followed by a 5-minute break. Encourage students to focus on weaker areas rather than wasting precious time revising what they already know. And discuss how to create a positive study environment, i.e. limiting mobile phone use. You could offer ready-to-use tools to help students get started, for example revision checklists or subject-specific practice questions or guides. Teach revision techniques so that students can choose one that works for them. Some examples here are spaced repetition, so reviewing material at increasing intervals, for example every 1 day, then every 3 days, then every 7 days. Or the Feynman technique, which is where students would write down a concept as if teaching it to a child, then refine gaps in understanding. Incorporate the use of digital or physical tools into lessons to identify or highlight key information. For example, using things like highlighters, mini whiteboards, post-it or online revision apps. Introduce active reading strategies to encourage better engagement with texts. So, for example, the SQ3R method, which is to survey, question, read, recite and review. Highlighting key points or annotating margins with summaries or questions can be useful. And paraphrasing paragraphs after reading to reinforce understanding. Model good study habits during lessons and encourage students to replicate. For example, show them how to break down complex tasks into manageable chunks, or conduct live note-taking on a topic to illustrate the process. You could work through a past exam question as a class and highlight key strategies for revision. Make revision interactive and fun. So example, use group quizzes or Kahoot sessions, have peer-led study groups where students help and teach each other, and gamify revision with challenges and rewards for completing tasks. And then personalise the approach, recognising that students have different learning styles and preferences. So, for example, you could encourage visual learners to use diagrams and colour coding, or support auditory learners with podcasts or recorded lectures. And teach note-taking strategies that suit different learning preferences and subject needs. For example, the Cornell method divides the page into sections for notes, cues and a summary. Or mind maps can be great for visual learners to show how to connect ideas with diagrams. Even bullet points or outlines encourage concise, organised note structures. So by teaching these strategies, students can develop strong study habits, build confidence and become more independent learners. Flipped learning is an excellent approach for T-level students as it promotes active learning, independence and a deeper understanding of technical concepts. So firstly, what is flipped learning? Well, students can learn foundational material, for example, through videos, readings or tasks outside of class before a lesson, and then class time is focused more on activities that would deepen understanding, such as problem solving, discussions and hands-on tasks. So some steps to implement flipped learning could be to assign engaging material for students to complete at home. This could be something like a video or a tutorial where you would create or signpost a video explaining topics or demonstrating specific real-world applications of concepts. You could assign short reading tasks, for example, from articles or blog posts. You could use gamified learning platforms such as quizzes or Kahoots, or provide note-taking guided tasks using templates or key questions to ensure active engagement with the materials given. Flipped learning should work well for T-level students because they gain theoretical knowledge independently, freeing up classroom time for practical applications to industry. Some ideas for practical applications you could use would be things like building and configuring networks or using physical equipment or simulators such as Cisco Packet Tracer. They could practice tasks such as troubleshooting or creating cybersecurity strategies. Group work, they could work on collaborative tasks such as designing a secure network for a hypothetical company or discuss the pre-class material in small groups to clarify any doubts. You could incorporate problem-solving sessions where students could create, for example, risk assessments or planning data backup strategies and use case studies aligned with T-level assessments. You could also conduct short quizzes to check understanding of pre-class material. So the benefits of flipped learning for T-level students are that students should engage more with practical real-world problems in class. Students can revisit the materials at their own pace if needed, and the classroom time can focus on more advanced problem solving and application of content. And finally, it mimics real-world learning processes where independent research and collaboration are essential. Now that we've explored some strategies and ideas that you can try in the classroom, I'd like to remind you of the other support we offer during your T-level delivery. There are many more recorded sessions on our YouTube playlists, which are accessible following the links here or by searching for NCFE on YouTube. From this video today, you can navigate back to our digital support and digital business specific recordings. You'll find videos here that will help you prepare for digital assessments, so please do spend some time finding what's appropriate for you and your team. You can also find support materials via our qualifications page. If you're new to T-levels, please do visit this page. Here you will find lots of resources to support your delivery. And via the events page, you can book to join us on our live events and see what support we're offering moving forward. And this page is divided into months, so you can easily see what's available and plan it into your diary. There are also links to the pre-recorded webinars to support with specific areas of your digital T-level delivery. We also offer one-to-one support, so if you haven't already, please do book a call with me so that we can work together as you either begin or continue your T-level delivery. These calls are designed to be bespoke for your provider and a chance to get support and for us to answer any questions. You'll see the link to book a call is on the bottom of the slide. If you have any individual T-level queries in the meantime, you can also email our dedicated T-level team via the email address on the screen. Lastly, we'd really appreciate it if you could use the QR code on the screen here to share your valuable feedback. Your comments really do help us reflect on our sessions and offer targeted and relevant support, which in turn allows you to get the best outcomes for your students. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. I hope you found this recording useful, and I look forward to seeing you at our live events over the coming academic year.